Hello and welcome back for another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. Make this your one-stop shop to track all the progress on the political and literal battlefield. Now, let's go ahead and get started. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant was yet again targeted this week. Rafael Grossi, head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, has emphasized the critical nature of this situation, indicating that the latest assaults could open a new, perilous chapter of the war.
Since the onset of the war in Ukraine, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has become a target of sporadic attacks, raising fears of a nuclear disaster. The International Atomic Energy Agency seeks to prevent the strikes from escalating. Following the strike, head of the agency, Rafael Grossi, issued a severe warning after the plant, which is the largest in Europe and has been under Russian control since February 2022, was targeted by drones.
No one can conceivably benefit or gain any military or political advantage from attacks against nuclear facilities. Attacking a nuclear power plant, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute no-go.
An IAEA expert team confirmed at least 3 direct hits on the plant's main reactor containment structures, marking a significant increase in nuclear safety and security risks. While one strike on the reactor dome of Unit 6 did not compromise nuclear safety, Grossi said that any attack on the plant's primary containment structure significantly heightens the risk of a nuclear incident. He has also called for military restraint and urged the global community to seek de-escalation of what he describes as a very serious situation.
In a move to balance support for Ukraine with concerns of European farmers, the EU has agreed to impose tougher restrictions on certain agricultural imports from Ukraine. The decision, which extends the duty-free and unrestricted access given to Ukrainian goods since the 2022 Russian invasion, now includes caps on products such as poultry, eggs, sugar, corn, groats, and honey.
The new agreement comes after significant pressure from EU farmers, who have been protesting low incomes and market undercutting by cheaper Ukrainian imports. Notably, no cap was applied to wheat imports, a point of contention among countries like France and Poland.
This is not all the problems, not solving of all the problems of farmers. For example, the economical problems of farmers, the decrease of the prices, but the simplification of the administrative burden is very important.
The preliminary agreement received approval from EU ambassadors and is pending formalization by the European Parliament Committee. If ratified, it will trim approximately 240 million euros from the earnings of Ukrainian farm products in the EU compared to 2023.
Our interest was, on one hand, that we ensure Ukraine can continue to export agricultural products where they are urgently needed to their destination countries in the south. Wheat was exempted. We have acted for that. I find the compromise is a smart one that brings together on one side the interests of agriculture in the European Union and on the other the interests of Ukraine.
Ukraine, which supplies a modest percentage of EU's eggs and poultry, argues that it compensates for a sugar deficit on the EU market. The EU's solidarity with Ukraine remains strong, but the bloc is also listening to its farmers, who have voiced their struggles in competing against imports not subject to the same stringent EU environmental and animal welfare standards.
According to recent reports from British intelligence, Russia is aiming to recruit approximately 400,000 contract soldiers this year alone. This move is seen as an effort to bolster its military forces in Ukraine, which have suffered significant losses.
The British Ministry of Defense has disclosed that the new recruitment is part of Russia's broader plan to expand its armed forces to 1.3 million personnel this year and to 1.5 million in the future. In addition to these recruitment efforts, Russia also started its spring conscription on April 1, 2024. The draft plans to enlist about 150,000 soldiers aged between 80 to 30 years, who will serve for 12 months across various branches of the Russian military. However, these conscripts are currently not engaged in combat operations in Ukraine. The intelligence report suggests that the Russian troops in Ukraine are mainly comprised of contract service members and some reservists mobilized towards the end of 2022. Conscripts are often pressured to enter contract service and serve in Ukraine, a strategy likely adopted to avoid unpopular combat losses among conscript soldiers. Losses among volunteer soldiers are perceived more tolerantly by society. The British Ministry of Defense had previously said that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced the creation of 2 new armies in 2024, made up of 14 divisions and 16 brigades. The exact type, location and composition of these units was not specified, but they are expected to include mechanized, armored, artillery and logistical units.
And now let's take a look at the developments along the front line in a post since last week, since we had our show last Saturday. Of course, nothing has changed on the ammunition front. Ukraine still badly needs ammunition to fend off Russian advances in several key areas along the front line. Another big development this week is air defenses. Kiev desperately needs air defenses. The city of Kharkiv being pounded by glide bombs and Russian drones. That is very much a problem, and it is very fixable if President Biden could transfer Patriot missile systems to some key European partners, and they could send theirs to Kiev. But we're waiting on such a development. Now let's take a closer look along the front line. We start off in the area in the south. Of course, near the city of Kherson. We're going to Bakhmut first. Okay, sorry about that. We're going to Bakhmut first. And of course, the battle for Chasiv Yar is active and ongoing. Ukrainian forces so far able to hold back the Russians from advancing on the city. But if you can see at the map here, we show key directions to the strategically important cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Of course, Chasiv Yar is a very important, critical city that stands in the way of making the advances to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Very important for Ukrainian forces. Fortunately, there are battle-tested Ukrainian army in that area, and they outnumber Russian forces at the moment. They also hold an advantage in that Chasiv Yar is higher up, and so the Ukrainians holding the high ground. But ammunition remains critical here in this part of the front. Now, if we go down to Avdiivka, the situation there, the Russians are continuing to make incremental advances to the west, and of course to these key cities are going to be important for Russia's to Podrovomaysky and Umainsky. The area of the contested area beyond the occupied areas right now continues to grow by the day, being very difficult to slow the Russian advance or halt the Russian advance. Of course, we'll be monitoring this situation closely. And then finally, if we go up to the north, up to Kupiansk, not too many changes there. The city of Kupiansk continues to be held by Ukrainian forces. However, to the east, you have Russian forces continuing to try and advance on the city of Kupiansk. Now let's take a look at some of these. We talk about air defense. Well, there's one critical weapon system that Russia is using lately. The air defense is not going to be very successful about, and that is glide bombs. So let's take a look at this video and see just exactly what this looks like. glide bombs being very difficult for Ukrainians to defend against and being increasingly used in Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. Now back to Chasiv Yar, the situation there remains difficult to say the least. Most of the city has been destroyed, constantly pounded by artillery, by Russian forces. About a year ago, Russia took over the city of Bakhmut and has been pushing on Chasiv Yar ever since, unsuccessfully. However, with the lack of ammunition right now, it is making the situation much worse in the city. Of course, you can see artillery rounds being fired by Russian forces on the canal district of Chasiv Yar. It will be very important for Ukraine to hold this city. It will have to do so. It's a very critical situation there. Of course, Chasiv Yar leading up to strategically important cities of Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. All right, now we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back. And now it's time to look at the war in Ukraine through a journalist's lens. For that, I'm joined by Boris Shalurov, local producer, volunteer, and activist who's now joining me from Kharkiv. Hello, Boris. Thanks for joining us on the show here on Ukraine this week.
Hey, Don. I'm happy to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So, every time I'm reporting on the news lately, it seems that Kharkiv is the center of attention of Russian forces continuing to pound the city. Tell me, what is the current situation there, and how, what has been the atmosphere over the last several days, weeks?
Look, today is a good day because, like I told you before, sometimes we don't have electricity and connection. At this moment, everything is fine, so I can talk to you. Kharkiv is under attacks. Lately, it's been maybe within day by day. Sometimes they make breaks, but attacks happen to be more massive and more usual. Sometimes people compare it to what happened in 2022. So situation got a bit more harder, but in the same time, we see a lot of news that propagandists are trying to pull up. That people are leaving the city. To be honest with you, it's not true because I see a lot of people in the city still. And maybe if you remember, it was was less people when you were here than now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I remember times when Kharkiv was pretty empty, and then I also remember times when a lot of people came back. So, okay, so people are staying in Kharkiv, and they're pushing through this. What does the electricity situation look like? I mean, is everybody running generators? How long do you get power during the day?
Look, it is. They're trying to fix the energy systems because they've been destroyed, as you see it in the news, like power plants and other electricity systems, basically. Mm-hmm. But the situation is not as bad, maybe, as it can look like. Usually I don't have power for like 6 to 8 hours, but you know, I live under the war. Well, war started in 2014, but the full invasion happened in 2022. So for these 2 years, a lot of people prepared. And yes, we all have like generators, EcoFlows, you know, sources where we can get energy, charge our phones, and get at least some connection so we can read news and contact our families to tell them that we are all right.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know, if we look in Russian press, and I know you guys are like, you know, the value of that is literally zero. But I wonder if people are talking about this in Kharkiv because, you know, on Russian propaganda channels, they're saying they want to flatten Kharkiv or they want to make Kharkiv completely unlivable for the people, probably in a bid to try and take it by force, obviously. The city is well defended. But are people talking about the fact that glide bombs might flatten the city or be increasingly used and destroy larger parts of Kharkiv?
Look, of course, people are afraid of it, and it's normal. It's war, and it's a very powerful weapon what they use on a civilian people. Mm-hmm. They shoot just a neighborhood from time to time, saying that they destroyed an you know, a spot where was hundreds of Legion fighters, which is also a lie.
Right.
Anyway, to be honest with you, as a person who doesn't have kids yet, it's probably easier for me to live and to feel, you know, normal. I can't call it normal because we also want to live life. But people with kids, people who have to take care of, you know, their siblings who has sicknesses or disabilities, I would recommend for them to not live on the northern part of the city. Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you. Oh, okay. It looks like we lost Boris. Well, that was the local producer, good friend Boris there, Salakhurov. In a recent interview, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his concerns over the Russian influence in the American political system. He firmly rejected the notion supported by some allies of former U.S. President Donald Trump that Ukraine could expediently conclude the ongoing war by surrendering significant territories.
President Zelensky stated his willingness to consider Trump's suggestions for ending the conflict. However, he approached the subject with caution, mindful of the complex implications such discussions entail.
About American aid, it's of critical importance to us. I still believe that we can get a positive role in the United States Congress. Unfortunately, we are hostages of the situation. Unfortunately, the issue of Ukraine, the issue of Russia's war against Ukraine, has become a question of internal politics in the United States.
This statement follows reports of Trump's alleged intention to coerce Ukraine to a peace agreement with Russia, which would involve Kyiv relinquishing control over parts of its territory.
You know, that's something that could have been negotiated because there were certain parts, Crimea and other parts of the country that a lot of people expected could happen. You could have made a deal. So they could have made a deal where there's less territory right now than Russia's already taken, to be honest. And you could have made a deal where nobody was killed. They had a deal. They would have had a Ukraine country. Now nobody even knows if Ukraine is going to be totally taken over. I will say this. Something's going on, and it's not good for Ukraine.
Zelensky has extended an invitation to Trump to visit Ukraine to allow the former US president to witness the situation firsthand and form his own opinions. Amidst the backdrop of a prolonged conflict, Zelensky issued a stark warning. Without the approval of military aid from the United States Congress, Ukraine faces the risk of losing the war.
Ukraine is grateful for the support of the United States and every American who feels the same as we do, that freedom should never be defeated. And it is very important for Congress to maintain its leadership so that the defense of freedom remains an idea that unites, uniting both within countries and the majority of the world.
His comments underscore the urgency of the situation as Ukraine continues to grapple with shortages of manpower and ammunition. Meanwhile, Russia intensifies its assaults on Ukrainian cities and probes for vulnerabilities along the front lines.
And now I'd like to welcome to the program to Ukraine this week, Randy Mott. He's a Republican activist, lawyer, and environmental businessman. It's great to see you. It's great to have you on the program this week.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, there's a lot being said if we look at like all the political developments throughout Europe for the past couple weeks. We can see European leaders are scrambling to fill the gap left in U.S. leadership at the moment, right? But everybody's fearful about a potential win for Donald Trump. Are these fears well-founded?
I don't think so. Well, I don't think so at all. First, Trump does a lot of, I call them head fakes, and his comments about the Europeans not doing enough was designed to kick more European defense budgets up, and it worked very effectively. All of a sudden, you know, and remember in his administration when the Russian Wagner Group fired on U.S. Special Forces and Syrian allies in Syria, and he ordered the destruction of the Wagner Group. He said, fire them up. How can you imagine President Biden shooting at the Wagner Group anywhere in the world? I can't.
I can't either.
So the rumors that we're going to push Ukraine for territorial concessions were denied by the campaign and by some higher-ups. It was a Washington Post story, which is hardly politically neutral. And he just appeared yesterday with Speaker Johnson supporting converting the aid to a loan program. This actually, well, there are two issues with Republicans besides some latent environmental isolationism in our party. One is the budget impact of the aid, and the second is the lack of strategy. What is the goal? Now, if you were to ask Jake Sullivan what's the goal in U.S. support of Ukraine right now, I don't think he could tell you.
I heard, and I love saying this, I heard General Breedlove speak at the Berlin Security Conference, and he talked about the political rhetoric saying, we will support Ukraine as long as it takes.
Yeah. It takes to do sounds like another 20-year war.
Right.
No, the only group in Washington that is actively supporting Ukraine winning in 1991 borders are the Republican committee chairs in the House. And they said, tell the Pentagon the mission is they win the war, give them what they need. Ironically, the loan program that looks like it will come out of the House now actually has fewer constraints on providing aid because it's not tied to the budget. So you want another 200 Bradleys? We put 200 Bradleys. And hopefully the loan balance will carry them at the market value, which is far less than their book value. But it actually opens up a lot. I think the thing that will come out of it that is better for Ukraine is pushing to say our goal is victory, not a perpetual war. The other problem we have, frankly, is in trying to appeal for aid. Even Ukraine supporters are emphasizing all the destruction, and your interview you just had online about Kharkiv sort of being in a squeeze. And that tends to also reinforce people saying that Ukraine can't win, which everybody with serious military experience and contacts knows is false.
Right.
The glide bombs going into Kharkiv could be interdicted by more air defense. They could be interdicted by NATO more modern fighters with more recent generation air-to-air weapons. They could take out those planes before they could be in range of releasing a glide bomb. So we have air-to-air missiles that go out more than 300, 400 kilometers, way much further than, much longer than the range of the glide bombs. They would never have to leave Ukraine to take out those airplanes. We can do this. There's a lack of political will.
Well, certainly from the Biden administration, that's obvious at this point, right? Especially if we look at their performance over the last few weeks and months. It's put Ukraine into a precarious situation at the moment.
There's nothing would stop us right now from sending another 500,000 155 millimeter cluster rounds. Mm-hmm. We have, I don't know, we have 2 or 3 million of those rounds. Some of our allies have more. Most of them are saying we will never use them in combat again, which I think is a mistake. But they could be sent with, nominal. I mean, right now they could do that. They could do a loan right now. They could. But
at the end of the day, the war in Ukraine has been hijacked by politics.
Yep.
Yeah, we got a presidential election coming up. So therefore,
what we have in both parties is people who support Ukraine are unwilling to stick their neck out and push it publicly, because there's a significant percent of the population that doesn't want to do it. And it's an election year. If it were not an election year, it would be far less consequential. But nobody wants to get out and be a leader on the issue and aggressive with it for fear that, and it's a percent of both parties. Mm-hmm. It's a percent of both parties. The far left is also, they were the ones that circulated the letter about a peace agreement a year ago, about pushing them to peace negotiations, i.e. accept occupation and the death of all your relatives and the torture of your uncle. It'll be all right. I think coming out of this, everybody will be stronger, because I think there will be pressure to reduce restrictions on what Ukraine can do, reduce restrictions on long-range weapons, and the hawks in my party are far outnumber the skeptics, and I think when the dust settles, we will move the ball, further than the Biden administration wanted to go. I think that's the objective.
Well, that's been said for some time, and I guess that'll be yet to be seen.
But the propaganda from Russia is so much more sophisticated than the ham-fisted stuff that came out of the Cold War that many Poles experienced firsthand. It was laughably funny, the Kremlin lines about America and everything. But this stuff, they're going right to the seams in our society. And do you really want to spend all this money abroad? And Putin is somehow a champion of Christianity while he's, executing everybody who's not in the KGB church.
Yeah, it makes me want to go back to Ukraine and do some stories on all the churches that I've seen blown to smithereens. My final question, and as we approach the presidential election in the United States this year, is it possible that we could have actually a much more aggressive Republican approach after the elections? Could we compare this issue, say, to one that was on the border? That now is not the time to solve it. It's time to solve it after Donald Trump is elected.
I think that's the argument, and I think that we'll see after the election this 30% or so opposition to Ukraine aid, which is sort of the baked-in opposition, can be afforded to be ignored. It'll be another 2 years before the election. What cannot and will not happen, in my opinion, is an American president presiding over a major Russian victory in Ukraine. That would be political death. And it will not happen. Remember
it could be
the
a very
fallout.
strong legacy. The Ukrainian victory could be a very strong legacy.
Remember the fallout Biden got. Really many people track, if you look at his polling, the end of his effective political administration, where he had a higher favorability rating than disapproval, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. It was just the embarrassment about how clumsy it was, and seeing our allies and the people falling off the airplanes. It is, 2% of what a defeat in Ukraine would mean to America and the West? Maybe 2%, maybe 1%. Much bigger investment, but far less national interest to us and our allies. So, no American president is going to bail. And Donald Trump, even in his most careless moments of rhetoric, of which he has a lot, has never said he would cut off aid to Ukraine.
Right.
Now, some of the wackos on one end of my party have said that, but Donald Trump never said he would cut off aid. He was deliberately ambiguous, and I think that's the strategy.
Yeah, I think it's definitely plausible, and obviously we're, looking at the situation in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Ukraine can't wait for the elections. They need help right now. So hopefully
I
we
believe
see
it's
something
coming.
soon.
I believe it's coming. I think there are Ukraine reserve ammunition. There's some U.S. aid in the pipeline. There's other European aid in the pipeline. I think once people know that the U.S. aid is approved, it frees up things that are immediately available that they might not have to hold on to as a reserve. Right. So it should have a rapid impact on the battlefield, I think.
All right, well, let's stay hopeful. Well, thank you, Randy Mott, Republican activist, lawyer, and environmental businessman. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we're going to take a quick break. Now we're going to move on. In a decisive move to bolster its military ranks, Ukraine's parliament has passed a new mobilization bill. Now, this legislation is set to conscript hundreds of thousands of reinforcements to support Ukraine's efforts in its ongoing war with Russia.
As Ukraine faces growing casualties and new offensives from Russian forces, the need for reinforcements has become increasingly critical. The bill, which has been the subject of heated debate, aims to address the urgent need for fresh recruits to maintain the country's thinning front lines.
The decision is adopted. The law is adopted as a whole.
The exact number of conscripts has not been disclosed, but it is understood to be lower than the initial 500,000 target. The focus will be on enlisting men aged 25 and 26, marking their first eligibility for enforced enlistment.
There must be full mobilization. I think that our country has to become as militarized as possible. Every civilian, man or woman, doesn't matter, has to have a military profession. IT specialists, OSINT specialists, UAV specialists. There is a lot of different professions which are not directly on the battlefield, but which are very important.
A controversial aspect of the bill was the exclusion of a demobilized clause, which would have permitted soldiers to leave the military after 36 months of service.
This medal has two sides. From one side, yes, there is a need for demobilization. From the other, there will be no one to fight in case everyone is demobilized. The only way is to do it gradually, or something like this. I don't know.
The bill's passage follows a series of amendments and revisions, reflecting the continuous nature of the debate surrounding Ukraine's mobilization strategy. It also represents a strategic shift in Ukraine's approach to sustaining its military capabilities in the face of a protracted conflict.
And now I'd like to welcome to the program Matthew Van Dyke. He's the founder of Sons of Liberty International, and he also served in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Hello, finally we got you. Thanks for joining me on Ukraine this week.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So we witnessed the passing of the mobilization bill in Ukraine this week. And, well, knowing the Sons of Liberty International, I know you've done extensive training for the armed forces of Ukraine. You've been a member of the armed forces of Ukraine. So I think you're highly qualified to give your opinion on this bill, what it will achieve, what it won't achieve. So let's start with the positives. In your opinion, what does this bill achieve, and what are the good aspects of this mobilization bill?
We're lowering the draft age from 27 to 25 is a good first step. It might need to be lowered a bit more than that. There's increases in pay for soldiers. There's increases in leave time. There's an interest in rotating soldiers off and extending those times back with their family to remind them of what they're fighting for. So those are all good points. I don't think it'll be the last mobilization bill. But it's a very good start.
Right, because I've heard some pundits say that it's not going to achieve really significant numbers, although it claims that it can bolster forces significantly. But if we look at the timeline, maybe not this year. And since you've done so much training in Ukraine, when will we expect the results of this bill to produce more soldiers for the front lines?
Ukraine's talking about giving soldiers 3 months of training in some cases. In our experience, it's not that long of training. But, once the bill passes, it could be months before the soldiers are ready, hopefully by summer, once the bill's signed into law. So it's just in time. Just in time.
Well, and obviously they need ammunition so that they can continue to hold the ground. Now, looking at some of the negative aspects, in our previous discussion, you mentioned some of these bonuses for drone operators, for instance, or for destroyed equipment. That you see that as a negative. Please tell me why.
Right. There's a provision in the law that pays out bonuses for soldiers that destroy Russian equipment or capture it. This is something that Stalin started in Russia, that Putin continues today. Most militaries don't do this. I don't agree with this provision. It favors drone operators who are getting the most of the verified kills because everything they do is recorded. They're doing it from usually a safe distance, so they're at low risk. If you're rewarding on destroyed equipment, it favors them. It doesn't favor the man in the trench that is holding the line and fighting, that needs to be focused on firing his weapon and not filming it and not getting confirmation and not taking unnecessary risks trying to destroy a tank when in the situation he's in there might be a better objective. So it clouds target selection. It creates motivations that may not be in the interest of that particular situation at the time. So I just think it's a complication that isn't needed on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Well, demobilization was also thrown out of this bill. There's been a lot of guys fighting on the front lines for 2 years solid now, some way longer than that, right? Since the war is 10 years old. Do you think that was a big mistake for Ukraine to kind of avoid that issue at this point?
It's supposed to be taken up in further legislation, but it certainly has a lot of people angry. It was not good for morale. Soldiers who've been in the war 3 years expected that there would be a provision in the law that would demobilize them after 3 years, and that was taken out of the bill. At some point, they're going to have a bill involving demobilization, and they should have it soon to reassure soldiers that if they enlist or if they get drafted, that it's not a lifetime commitment.
Right. Now, concerning morale, how would you gauge the current morale amongst soldiers along the front line or in the armed forces in general in Ukraine? We're seeing this shortage of our ammunition, artillery, air defenses are starting to thin out. So how is the morale in the ranks?
It's always going to hurt morale when you're running lower on supply. Morale was very high when America and the West were very forthcoming with aid. And now that there's some doubt about that or delay, it certainly hurts morale on the front line. Then again, a friend of mine was recently wounded quite badly on the mission. And
oh, I believe we have lost our guest, that was Matthew Van Dyke, founder of the Sons of Liberty International. He also served in the armed forces of Ukraine. Extensive training for Ukrainian forces his organization has conducted. I've also been with them on demining missions as well. Fantastic organization, so you can check him out on social media. He's got a fascinating story, by the way, so you'll definitely want to do that. Well, we've been plagued with technical difficulties this week on Ukraine this week. But it was a pleasure to have this show. I thank you for joining us, and please tune in again next week. We'll have more guests and more analysis. See you then.